The land stretched wide and quiet under the morning sun. Dry wind moved through the tall grass, and the sound of cattle bells echoed across the valley. Samuel Cole, the rancher, walked along the fence line with his gloves on and pliers in his hand. He was checking the barbed wire again. He had sealed his land last spring after too many people crossed it without asking. Now his ranch was surrounded by sharp metal and heavy posts. No one came in and no one went out. He liked it that way. Samuel lived alone for many years. His small house stood in the middle of endless land. The barn was big and old, full of hay and tools, and the porch had a chair where he sat most evenings watching the sunset. Long ago, he had a wife and a little boy. They both passed during a harsh winter, when sickness came and no help could reach them. After that, Samuel stopped talking much. He worked, he fed the cattle, and he kept to himself. People in town said he was cold, but the truth was that he was only tired of loss, and tired of opening his heart. That day, while fixing a broken gate near the northern side of his land, Samuel noticed something strange. Far beyond the wire, near the dry creek bed, he saw small figures standing still. He squinted against the sunlight. At first he thought it was a group of coyotes or lost travelers. But as he came closer, he saw they were children, 5 young native girls, standing just beyond the fence. They were barefoot, wrapped in old cloth, their faces covered in dust. They didn't move even when they saw him. Samuel stopped about 10 steps away. His voice was calm but firm. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This is private land." The oldest girl, maybe 16, stepped forward. Her dark hair hung loose over her shoulders. Her voice was soft, but he could hear the fear in it. "We wait," she said simply. He looked around but saw no camp, no horses, no adults. "Where are your people?" he asked. The girl lowered her eyes. "Gone," she said. The others stayed close to her, holding onto her arms. Samuel rubbed his beard, unsure what to do. He had promised himself never to let strangers onto his land again. He had worked too hard to protect it. But these were just children, hungry, tired, and lost. He saw the youngest girl, no older than 7, trying to hide behind the others. Her small face was pale, her lips dry. "Wait here," he said, and walked back to the barn. He filled his canteen with water and brought a metal cup. When he returned, he poured a drink and handed it through the fence. The youngest girl took it with both hands and drank quickly, spilling some on her chin. Then she looked up at him with wide eyes, almost smiling. Samuel asked again, "No parents? No camp?" The oldest shook her head. Fire took them. He felt a heaviness in his chest. The world could be cruel, and he knew what that kind of loss felt like. Still, he couldn't just open his land to anyone. He nodded slowly. "You can rest for a while, then move west," he said. "There's a river that way." They didn't move. Even when the sun began to set, they stayed. The air turned cool, and the sound of crickets filled the valley. From his porch, Samuel could see their small shapes near the fence. They were sitting close together, using one blanket between them. He could tell they were shivering. He tried to ignore it, but he couldn't. He stood up, put on his hat, and walked toward them again. "You can't stay there," he said gently. "Coyotes come out at night." The oldest girl looked up. "Fence," she said, touching the barbed wire. "Too sharp." Samuel stared at the fence he had built with his own hands. It had been meant to protect him, but now it looked cruel, cold metal between him and 5 tired girls. He took out his pliers, cut one section loose, and pulled the wire apart. "Come through," he said. The girls hesitated, looking at one another. "Go on," he said quietly. One by one, they slipped through the gap. They moved carefully, afraid to make a mistake. Once inside, they stood close together watching him. He pointed toward the porch. "Sit there," he said. "I'll bring food." Inside the house, Samuel warmed some bread on the stove, poured milk and sliced dried meat into small pieces. He carried the tray outside. The girls ate slowly, polite and quiet. The youngest smiled for real this time, a small, thankful smile that reached her eyes. Samuel sat nearby on the steps, watching them. He hadn't shared a meal with anyone in years, and somehow the sound of them eating made the silence around him feel softer. When they finished, the oldest girl stood and spoke in a careful voice. "We thank you," she said. "We can go now." Samuel looked at the dark sky above. The moon was rising, silver and cold. "Not tonight," he said. "You'll sleep in the barn." They followed him to the barn, where he spread hay and gave them blankets. The girls lay down together, close and quiet. The youngest fell asleep first, resting her head on her sister's arm. Samuel left a lantern burning low and stepped outside. The night was peaceful, but Samuel couldn't sleep. He sat on his porch again, staring at the stars. His heart felt heavy, but not lonely. He thought about his wife's laughter, about his son running through the fields. He had closed that part of himself long ago, locking it behind fences and silence. But tonight, something small had changed. He could feel it like a soft wind moving through a room that had been shut for too long. At dawn, he went to the barn. The girls were already awake. One was folding blankets. Another was sweeping the floor with a small broom she had found. And the others were washing a tin bowl by the water trough. They stopped when they saw him, afraid they had done something wrong. "You don't need to do that," Samuel said. The oldest girl looked at him. "Work for food," she said. "Our way." He nodded slowly. "Then you can help with the chickens." The girls followed him outside. The morning air was fresh and cool. When they reached the chicken coop, Samuel showed them how to collect eggs. The youngest laughed when a hen tried to peck at her hand, and soon the others were laughing too quietly. But it was real laughter. For the first time in many years, Samuel smiled. He didn't even realize it until he saw the girls watching him with surprise. Later that evening, after a long day of work, Samuel went back to the fence to fix the broken wire. He repaired each section carefully, his hands steady and sure. But when he reached the part he had cut open the night before, he stopped. He looked at the small gap, big enough for a child to pass through. He thought about sealing it. But his hand didn't move. He left it open. The stars were beginning to appear, bright against the dark sky. From the barn came the soft sound of laughter and quiet talking. The house that once felt empty now carried a faint warmth, the sound of life returning. Samuel stood there for a long moment, looking at his land. The barbed wire still glinted in the fading light, but the fence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like something else, something that could still protect, but no longer needed to divide. He turned toward the barn and smiled faintly. The ranch was not silent anymore. It was alive again. And for the first time in many lonely years, Samuel Cole felt like he had a reason to keep the lantern burning through the night. The next morning came with the sound of birds over the fields. The sky was painted in soft gold, and Samuel woke up to something he had not heard in years: voices and laughter. He sat up on his bed listening for a moment. The sound came from outside, near the barn. It was gentle and light, the sound of children talking to each other. For a long time, his mornings had been filled only with silence and the creak of old wood. Now there was life again. When Samuel stepped outside, the 5 native girls were already at work. The oldest one was feeding the chickens. 2 were carrying buckets of water from the well, while the youngest tried to sweep the barn floor with a branch she had turned into a broom. Samuel stood there quietly, watching them for a moment. The air felt different, lighter, warmer. "Morning," he said finally. The girls stopped and turned, smiling shyly. "Morning," the oldest answered. Samuel walked toward them and helped lift the heavy bucket from the smallest girl's hands. "That's too much for you," he said. "Use a smaller one next time." The youngest giggled softly. "Big one faster," she said, proud of her effort. He couldn't help but smile. "Maybe, but don't fall into the well or I'll have to pull you out myself." That day, Samuel decided to let them stay a little longer. He told himself it would be until they were stronger or until someone from their tribe came looking for them. But as the days passed, he stopped counting. Each sunrise brought new sounds: laughter, work, songs in a language he didn't know. They began to help with everything on the ranch. The older 2 learned to milk the cows and collect eggs. The middle ones carried hay to the horses. The youngest followed Samuel everywhere, asking questions about everything: the windmill, the cattle, the big saddle in the barn. She called him Mr. Sam, and though he pretended not to like it, the name made him smile every time. At night, Samuel ate on the porch, and the girls would sit nearby on the steps, telling stories. The oldest spoke the most, sometimes mixing her language with English. She told stories about her people, about the stars, the rivers, and the spirits of the mountains. Samuel listened quietly, the glow from the lantern lighting their faces. It reminded him of nights long ago, when he had told his son bedtime stories. The pain of old memories began to fade, replaced by something gentler, something like peace. But word began to spread. One afternoon, while Samuel was buying supplies in town, a man from the general store asked, "You got company out there on your land, Cole?" Samuel frowned. "What kind of company?" The man shrugged. "Heard from the post-rider that you've got a bunch of Indian kids living with you. That true?" Samuel didn't answer right away. He just paid for his goods. "They needed help," he said finally. The man chuckled. "Help? You're turning your ranch into an orphanage now?" Samuel said nothing more. He loaded his wagon and left. On the ride back, his hands were tight on the reins. He didn't like people talking about his land or the girls. The world wasn't kind to them. He knew the way some folks thought, full of judgment, full of fear. When he got home, the girls were waiting for him near the fence. The youngest ran up to him, waving. "Mr. Sam, we find a baby bird." It fell from the tree. He smiled despite his heavy thoughts. "Show me." They led him to the barn where a tiny bird rested in a wooden box lined with hay. The girls had fed it water with a spoon. "We will make it fly again," the oldest said with quiet hope. Samuel looked at the small creature and nodded. "You did good," he said. That night, he sat on the porch again, thinking about the talk in town. He didn't care what people said about him, but he cared about the girls. He didn't want them to face the same cold looks he had seen in people's eyes. Still, he couldn't send them away. They had nowhere to go. The next morning, he made his choice. He hitched his horse and rode into town with the oldest girl beside him. Her name, he had learned, was Aluna. She sat quietly, watching the land pass by. When they reached the sheriff's office, Samuel told him the story, how he found the girls, how they had no home left. The sheriff listened, his face calm. "You know, Sam," he said finally, "you're not breaking any law by helping them, but people will talk." "Let them talk," Samuel said. "They're staying." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then you keep them safe. The world ain't gentle to folks who are different." "I know," Samuel replied. When they rode back, Aluna looked at him and asked softly, "They angry?" Samuel shook his head. "No, they just don't understand kindness anymore." She was quiet for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You different, Mr. Sam?" He didn't answer, but something in her words stayed with him. Weeks turned into months. The ranch changed. The fences were still there, but now they protected more than cattle. They protected a small family. The girls grew stronger. The youngest learned to read simple words from Samuel's old books. The middle ones made small crafts from dry grass and wood. They painted the barn doors with bright colors, making the old place look alive again. One morning, Samuel woke to the smell of food. When he stepped outside, the girls had made breakfast, eggs, bread, and wild berries they had gathered. The youngest placed a plate in front of him with a proud smile. "We make for you," she said. He looked at the food, then at their faces. "I never had such a breakfast," he said honestly. That day, as they ate together, laughter filled the air again. The land that once felt lonely now felt full of life. Sometimes people from town came by, pretending to be curious about buying cattle, but really just wanting to see the girls. Samuel met them at the gate every time, polite but firm. He never let them near. He didn't raise his voice or show anger, but his eyes said clearly that the ranch was off limits. Slowly, people stopped asking questions. Seasons changed. Winter came softly that year. The girls helped him store hay, mend roofs, and keep the fire burning. When snow fell, they built small figures outside the barn, laughing and running through the frost. Samuel stood at the door, watching with a smile hidden behind his scarf. On Christmas Eve, Samuel placed 5 wrapped bundles on the porch, simple gifts he had made from things around the house. Wool scarves, tiny carved animals, and 1 music box that still worked. When the girls opened them, their joy lit up the cold night. The youngest hugged his arm tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Mr. Sam." He looked down at her and said softly, "Family looks after each other." In that moment, something inside him healed. The house, once silent and dark, now glowed with warmth. The fence he had built to keep the world out had ended up bringing him something better, not just peace, but love. Years later, travelers passing through the valley spoke of a ranch where laughter never stopped, where a quiet man lived with 5 young women who called him father. They said the land looked different, greener, kinder, and the fence still stood, but with a wide open gate that no one ever dared to close again. Samuel grew older, his hair silver under his hat, but his heart stayed young. Every morning when he saw the girls working and singing across the fields, he thanked the day he had cut that fence. He used to think he had sealed his land to protect himself, but now he knew the real protection came from opening his heart. And so, beyond the fence where silence once ruled, there was laughter, kindness, and the kind of peace that only family could bring. The ranch, once empty, had become home again, not just for him, but for all who waited patiently beyond the wire.